The early morning of June 6, 1944, dawned gray over the Normandy coast. The English Channel, churned by wind and tide, reflected a sky heavy with clouds. Thousands of Allied landing crafts approached the beaches, carrying men who had trained relentlessly for months. These were soldiers of the United States, Britain, and Canada, along with support units from Free France, preparing to change the course of World War II. On the German side, the Führer Hauptquartier, the Wolfschanze in Rastenburg, East Prussia, remained insulated in its fortress of confidence. Adolf Hitler, seated in his command room, reviewed reports from his generals. For months, he had been assured that the Allies would not risk a cross-channel invasion at this time. The Atlantic Wall, a massive system of fortifications stretching from Norway to the French-Spanish border, was nearly complete. Hitler had delegated Normandy's defense largely to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who insisted on armored reserves and mobile response units, but Hitler preferred rigid command structures and centralized authority. At 05:30 hours, the first reports reached the Führer. Reconnaissance units observed numerous small craft crossing the channel. Coastal radar and reports from German observers indicated an unusual number of ships heading toward the Normandy beaches. At first, Hitler was skeptical. The scale seemed improbable. He believed the Allies might be staging a diversion, a feint to draw German forces away from the Pas-de-Calais, which he still considered the primary target of invasion. He turned to his aide, General Wilhelm Keitel, and asked quietly, "Are you certain these are not decoys?" Keitel's response carried the weight of reality. "My Führer, the numbers suggest a full-scale landing." The reports from the coast are consistent with an invasion fleet of unprecedented size. Hitler's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. His mind, accustomed to meticulous planning and control, struggled with the notion that the Allies had achieved operational surprise. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he scanned maps, numbers, and messages arriving from Normandy. By 06:00, German radio units confirmed the landings. The first reports detailed Allied troops under fire, moving through hedgerows and sand dunes, supported by naval bombardments and air cover. Hitler's initial reaction was disbelief. He shouted for further confirmation, demanding that all available intelligence officers report in person. His aides scrambled, bringing intercepted messages, field reports, and urgent telegrams. The news spread rapidly within the Wolfschanze. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff, attempted to calm Hitler. "My Führer, the situation is manageable. We can counterattack once reserves are mobilized." Hitler shook his head violently. "Manageable? 156,000 troops ashore. How did they get past our coastal defenses undetected?" Our forces were ready. Meanwhile, on the Normandy beaches, the Allied soldiers advanced under devastating fire. Omaha Beach, held by the 352nd German Infantry Division and coastal artillery, became a killing ground. Soldiers struggled through wet sand, tangled in obstacles designed to slow them. Explosions rocked the shoreline, yet the Allies pressed forward with relentless determination. The first hours of D-Day revealed the immense planning behind Operation Overlord. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, had coordinated a massive deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, convincing the Germans that the invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais. Paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had already dropped behind enemy lines in the early hours, disrupting communications, capturing bridges, and sowing confusion. Back at the Wolfschanze, Hitler's fury escalated. He slammed his fist on the table, startling officers and aides. "This is a catastrophe, every plan, every precaution wasted." "How did they land with such impunity?" Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, Commander-in-Chief West, attempted to explain the tactical reality. "Mein Führer, the weather favored the Allied assault. Naval and air support allowed them to suppress our coastal batteries. Our reserves have been delayed, but we can still mount a counterattack." Hitler's response was blistering. "Delays are unacceptable. I want every reserve deployed immediately. Rommel is to report personally. I will not tolerate this incompetence." His eyes, red with rage, scanned the room. Generals and aides shrank under his gaze. The reality of the largest amphibious assault in history was beginning to shatter the carefully constructed facade of German invincibility. In London, across the Channel, Prime Minister Winston Churchill had risen before dawn. The BBC had begun broadcasting updates, and he had received word that the landings were underway. Churchill's office was crowded with intelligence officers, chiefs of staff, and advisors. He studied maps of the Normandy coast, the location of divisions, and the projected timetable of the assault. Churchill spoke quietly, yet with the intensity that had rallied Britain during its darkest days. "This is the moment we have prepared for. The men at the beaches know the stakes. They carry the hopes of free nations. His assistant, General Hastings Ismay, nodded solemnly. Yes, sir, the landings are underway. All initial reports indicate strong resistance, but the troops are advancing. Across the Normandy beaches, Allied commanders coordinated with naval bombardments and air support. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., son of the American president, landed with the 1st Infantry Division on Utah Beach. Despite being overweight and in poor health, he famously walked ashore with the first wave, encouraging troops and organizing units under fire. His calm presence helped prevent chaos amidst the storm of artillery, mines, and machine gun fire. Meanwhile, the German coastal defenses, though formidable, were not fully prepared for the scale of the invasion. Rommel had spent months fortifying positions, laying obstacles, mines, and machine gun nests, but he had anticipated an attack at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. His reserves were stationed miles away, awaiting orders that would never come in time. Inside the Wolfschans, Hitler demanded real-time updates. Teletypes clattered as messages arrived from German units in Normandy. Reports of heavy casualties, units pinned down by naval fire, paratrooper landings behind the lines, bridges seized, and communications disrupted. The Führer's disbelief turned into fury. Officers attempted to interject with practical solutions, but Hitler's temper allowed no room for reason. "Where is Rommel?" Hitler barked. "I want him here immediately." Every armored unit must engage, every division must counterattack. An officer attempted to advise restraint. "Main Führer, our panzer divisions cannot be deployed without coordination. Air superiority is lost. Naval artillery dominates the coastline." Hitler cut him off, shouting, "Excuses, I will not accept failure, send orders now." His aides moved frantically, relaying messages to field commanders, but delays and chaos slowed the response. German communications were fractured, and Allied sabotage by paratroopers ensured critical confusion. By mid-morning, the full scale of the landings became evident. Allied forces had established beachheads at Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches. Casualties were high, but the operation succeeded beyond expectations. 156,000 men were ashore, supported by thousands of vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces. Hitler's hope that the invasion was a diversion had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of total Allied commitment. His rage intensified, expressed not only in shouts but in furious gestures. He paced the room, flinging maps to the floor. "Every plan we made has been shattered, every prediction wrong. How could this happen under my command?" Meanwhile, Allied commanders moved to consolidate their positions. Major General Leonard T. Jarrow, commanding the 1st Infantry Division at Omaha, coordinated reinforcements and logistical support to sustain the beachhead. Brigadier General James M. Gavin, leading paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne, secured bridges over the Murderate River, ensuring the inland advance could continue. Across all beaches, Allied forces pressed forward despite heavy resistance, using combined arms tactics, naval bombardment, and the determination of soldiers who had trained for this exact moment. In Berlin, Nazi propaganda machines attempted to downplay the scale of the disaster. Radio broadcasts claimed minor skirmishes, exaggerated German resistance, and blamed weather and luck for temporary setbacks. Hitler, however, was well aware of the reality. Within his private headquarters, fury and panic reigned. Generals debated countermeasures, but delays and miscommunication rendered many plans ineffective. By late afternoon, the Allied beachheads were secure. The invasion had begun, and German forces were struggling to respond. Hitler, exhausted and enraged, refused to leave his headquarters. His aides and generals feared further outbursts, but they knew that the Führer's reaction would influence decisions across the front. Orders were issued, some contradictory, reflecting the chaos and disbelief within the German high command. Hitler would later recall the day in post-war interrogations as one of the most shocking of his command. His anger at Rommel, Keitel, Jodl, and the German military structure colored every decision in the following days, delaying effective counterattacks and contributing to the consolidation of the Allied foothold in Normandy. The significance of June 6, 1944, extended beyond the immediate tactical outcome. It represented the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Allied soldiers, facing intense resistance, established a presence on French soil that would expand relentlessly in the following weeks. Hitler's disbelief and rage demonstrated a leadership paralyzed by surprise, contributing to Germany's strategic failures in the critical initial hours of D-Day. By mid-morning on June 6, 1944, the Allied beachheads in Normandy were slowly consolidating. On Omaha Beach, the 1st Infantry Division faced a relentless storm of German artillery, machine gun fire, and fortified obstacles, yet soldiers pressed forward. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., though suffering from arthritis and fatigue, moved among the men, shouting encouragement, personally leading units to organize the chaos. Across Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches, Canadian, British, and American forces coordinated with naval gunfire to suppress enemy fortifications, advancing despite heavy casualties. Back in the Wolfschans, Hitler's disbelief had transformed into a paralyzing fury. Officers, generals, and aides clustered around him, some attempting to calm him, others too terrified to speak. Reports were arriving in chaotic bursts, detailing the success of the initial landings and the capture of critical points behind German lines by paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. The scale of the invasion was unprecedented. Hitler's voice rose, sharp and cutting. This cannot be. 156,000 troops ashore and our defenses crushed, every calculation, every forecast destroyed. Where is Rommel? Where are the armored reserves? Generals scrambled to respond. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, stationed in France, had been inspecting fortifications on the Atlantic Wall and was due back in the Wolfschans, but communications delays and Allied sabotage of lines slowed messages. Hitler's rage magnified as he realized that even his trusted commanders could not fully relay the unfolding disaster. General Alfred Jodl attempted to explain the situation in measured tones. Main Führer, initial resistance at some beaches remains intact. Counterattacks can still be organized. Our panzer divisions are prepared to respond once they are mobilized. Hitler's reaction was instantaneous and furious. Delay. Delay, do you understand the meaning of delay? Every hour lost gives them the opportunity to strengthen their foothold. Mobilize now or the Reich is doomed. Meanwhile, German coastal commanders, confused and under fire, struggled to respond effectively. Communication lines had been cut by paratroopers and sabotage teams, artillery was being suppressed by Allied naval bombardments, and panic among frontline units grew. By 0900, the reality of the situation became undeniable. Allied forces were firmly ashore, moving inland with surprising speed. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill followed events closely. By late morning, he convened a meeting with General Sir Bernard Montgomery and other senior Allied leaders. Reports confirmed that despite fierce German resistance, beachheads were secure and inland advances were proceeding. Churchill's expression was grave but resolute. The men have landed, the operation is proceeding despite the inevitable casualties. This is the turning point we have awaited. Across the channel, Allied troops faced unimaginable chaos. On Omaha Beach, men crawled through wet sand under fire, carrying wounded comrades and maneuvering past obstacles meant to stop them. Naval gunfire continued to pound German fortifications, creating dust, smoke, and confusion. Communications were limited, but officers improvised, coordinating units as best they could. The courage displayed by soldiers under such conditions would become legendary, forming the foundation of the narrative of D-Day heroism. Back in the Wolfschans, Hitler's anger was accompanied by frantic efforts to organize a coherent response. He summoned General Leo Jaeger von Schweppenberg and Field Marshal von Kluge to determine how the panzer divisions could be deployed. The generals reported logistical delays, armored units were stationed too far from the beaches, rail transport was congested, and fuel shortages limited mobility. Hitler's fury erupted again. Fuel mobility. These are excuses for incompetence. The enemy must be destroyed before they consolidate. I will not tolerate failure, generals attempted to restrain him. Cadel interjected, Main Führer, a rapid counterattack without proper coordination could result in catastrophic losses. The beachheads are heavily defended and our units are vulnerable. Hitler's response was brutal. I do not care, order the attack immediately. Every panzer, every battalion, every available unit must engage. Delay is defeat, reports from Normandy illustrated the chaos in real time. Paratroopers had secured bridges and key road junctions inland. Units of the 6th Airborne Division in the British sector had captured Pegasus Bridge, preventing German reinforcements from moving south. American airborne troops had seized crossings over the Murderate River, blocking enemy movements toward Utah Beach. The meticulous planning of Operation Overlord was paying off, even in the face of German defensive strength. Inside the Wolfschans, Hitler's aides struggled to maintain composure. Officers like General Jodl and Field Marshal von Kluge attempted to calm the Führer and offer practical advice, but each report seemed to inflame him further. Hitler paced the room, striking maps and gesturing violently. His obsession with micromanaging the deployment of reserves, despite logistical impossibilities, slowed German decision-making and hindered effective counterattacks. By noon, German High Command had issued conflicting orders. Some units were instructed to attack immediately, others were told to hold positions pending Hitler's approval. The result was paralysis at the operational level. Allied troops exploited every delay, moving inland, securing villages, and linking beachheads. The chaos and indecision within German command structures contributed directly to the success of the landings. Meanwhile, Allied leaders coordinated reinforcements. Naval convoys delivered troops, vehicles, and supplies to the beaches, while airborne units continued to disrupt German communications and movements. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, remained aboard the USS Augusta, overseeing operations and receiving reports. By mid-afternoon, he radioed London. Initial objectives achieved, further consolidation underway, troops advancing despite resistance, operation proceeding according to plan. At the Wolfschans, Hitler's disbelief had given way to stunned realization. He could no longer deny the scale and success of the invasion. Officers reported that Allied forces had secured key points along the Normandy coastline and were moving inland. Panic set in as he grasped that this was no feint. This was a full-scale Allied assault. Hitler's voice dropped, almost muttering in shock, "The invasion, it has succeeded, they are ashore." The room remained tense and silent for a moment. Officers exchanged anxious glances, knowing that the Führer's decisions in the coming hours could determine the fate of German forces in Western Europe. Hitler then erupted again, issuing orders that were increasingly contradictory and impossible to execute. His fury, combined with disbelief, delayed the deployment of panzer divisions in the critical first hours, giving Allied forces the opportunity to establish a secure foothold. Across the beaches, Allied troops continued to fight with remarkable courage. On Gold Beach, the 50th Infantry Division of the British Army overcame German defenses after intense firefights. Canadian forces at Juno Beach captured the town of Courseulles-sur-Mer, despite strong resistance from the 716th Infantry Division. Every advance, every village captured, and every bridge secured contributed to the psychological and strategic collapse of German defensive plans. By evening, the initial objectives of Operation Overlord had been achieved. Allied forces were firmly established on the beaches, supply lines were being established, and units were moving inland. Hitler's reaction, characterized by disbelief and rage, had contributed to the delayed and disorganized German response. Within the Führer Hauptquartier, tension remained high, and aides worked feverishly to interpret the Führer's orders, many of which were impractical or contradictory. The significance of June 6, 1944, became increasingly clear. The Allies had achieved the first successful large-scale amphibious landing in history, establishing a crucial beachhead on the continent. German forces, despite superior defensive positions and local knowledge, had failed to repel the invasion due to a combination of meticulous Allied planning, airborne operations, naval and air superiority, and the paralyzing effect of Hitler's disbelief and rage. By nightfall, Normandy's coast was transformed. The beaches, though scarred with obstacles and the remnants of fierce fighting, were under Allied control. Thousands of soldiers, exhausted but triumphant, began preparing for the inland push. Meanwhile, Hitler remained in the Wolfschans, his anger tempered by the grim acknowledgement of reality. The day would be remembered as the turning point in Western Europe, the moment when the tide began to turn decisively against Nazi Germany. As June 6, 1944 drew to a close, the Allied forces in Normandy were beginning to consolidate their beachheads. Across the 5 landing zones, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, men dug in, treated the wounded, and coordinated supply chains. The courage and determination displayed by troops under fire had prevented German forces from pushing them back into the sea. In the Wolfschans, Hitler remained isolated in his command room. The realization that 156,000 Allied troops had successfully landed weighed heavily upon him. Reports continued to arrive from the Western Front, confirming the scale of the invasion. Villages were being captured, key bridges were in Allied hands, and German forces were struggling to regroup. Hitler's voice was sharp and cutting as he addressed his generals. "Every unit must counterattack immediately. There can be no hesitation. If we do not act now, all is lost." Field Marshal Günther von Kluge attempted to calm him, explaining that armored divisions could not be deployed without proper reconnaissance and supply. "Mein Führer, rushing our panzer divisions without coordination will result in destruction by Allied air and naval forces." Hitler slammed his fist on the table. "Destruction, better destruction than passivity. The enemy must be destroyed before they consolidate." Meanwhile, on the beaches, Allied engineers worked feverishly to clear obstacles and build temporary roads for armored vehicles. Supply chains were established to ensure reinforcements, ammunition, and medical care reached the front lines. In Omaha, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr. continued to organize men under fire, ensuring that units remained cohesive despite heavy casualties. Paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had succeeded in securing bridges and disrupting German communications, hampering the response from German headquarters. In the American sector, paratroopers prevented reinforcements from reaching Omaha and Utah beaches, giving infantry the time to advance inland. In the Wolfschanze, Hitler's frustration became increasingly personal. He blamed Rommel for inadequate fortifications and his generals for perceived delays. The command structure, already rigid and centralized, was thrown into confusion by contradictory orders, reflecting the Führer's escalating anger. Reports continued to arrive from Normandy, detailing both successes and setbacks. German officers described fierce resistance at strongpoints, but acknowledged that Allied forces had established a firm foothold. The sheer scale of the invasion, combined with coordinated airborne operations and relentless naval bombardment, rendered local counterattacks ineffective. By late afternoon, Hitler's orders had created chaos among German units. Some divisions moved too early without proper support, while others delayed awaiting clarification. Allied troops, exploiting these delays, expanded their hold on key villages, bridges, and road junctions. Coastal artillery, previously thought impregnable, had been neutralized by Allied naval bombardments, allowing the landing forces to advance. On the beaches, soldiers fought valiantly to secure the high ground and prevent German counterattacks. Major General Leonard T. Jarrow coordinated the 1st Infantry Division at Omaha Beach, ensuring wounded were evacuated and supply lines maintained. On Gold Beach, British forces pushed inland to capture towns and disrupt German positions, while Canadian forces on Juno Beach advanced through fortified villages, engaging enemy infantry and overcoming obstacles. In the Wolfschanze, Hitler's reaction remained volatile. Officers attempted to provide rational analysis, but the Führer's anger and disbelief limited their influence. He paced the room, striking maps and gesturing violently, demanding immediate action despite logistical impossibilities. Communications delays and sabotage by Allied paratroopers ensured that orders were inconsistently executed. The failure of German counterattacks in the first hours became evident. Panzer divisions, delayed and mismanaged, could not reach the beaches in time to repel the invasion. Hitler's insistence on personally approving every movement exacerbated the situation, resulting in a fragmented and ineffective response. Meanwhile, Allied forces consolidated supply routes and established defensive perimeters to withstand potential counterattacks. Engineers built temporary bridges, artillery units were positioned to support infantry, and medics attended to the wounded under constant threat of German fire. The meticulous planning of Operation Overlord, combined with deception operations such as Fortitude, had successfully prevented a coherent German response. By evening, the first day of the Normandy invasion concluded with the Allies firmly in control of multiple beachheads and key inland positions. Casualties were significant, but the operation achieved its objectives, securing a foothold on French soil and demonstrating the effectiveness of combined arms tactics. In the Wolfschanze, Hitler's fury gave way to grim acknowledgement. He could not deny the scale of the Allied success. Officers attempted to organize counterattacks, but the initial confusion and German mismanagement had allowed the Allies to secure critical terrain and disrupt communications. Hitler's anger, combined with disbelief, contributed directly to the failure of effective resistance during the invasion's first day. The events of June 6, 1944, marked a turning point in the European theater. Hitler's initial disbelief and subsequent rage hindered the German military response, while Allied determination, meticulous planning, and coordination ensured the success of one of the largest amphibious assaults in history. The consolidation of beachheads allowed for the continued advance of Allied forces into occupied France, setting the stage for the liberation of Western Europe. Across the continent, the psychological impact of D-Day was profound. Allied soldiers understood that their courage and sacrifice had shifted the momentum of the war. Hitler's inability to respond effectively demonstrated the vulnerability of German command structures and the limitations imposed by his personal leadership style. By nightfall, Normandy's beaches, scarred and bloody, symbolized the triumph of strategy, preparation, and bravery over rigid command and surprise. Allied troops dug in for the night, ready to push further inland, while German forces scrambled to mount any form of organized resistance. Hitler, isolated and enraged, contemplated the consequences of a successful invasion that would ultimately herald the beginning of the end for the Third Reich.